If only 3 people on the set of Alec Baldwin's movie Rust would have practiced basic safety techniques, cinematographer Helena Hutchins would still be alive. Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk a little bit about the incident that happened on the set of the movie Rust, just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, where Alec Baldwin accidentally fired a weapon at cinematographer Helena Hutchins, which took her life. Now, yesterday, a New Mexico judge sentenced Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer on the set of Rust, to 18 months in prison. And we know that Alec Baldwin's hearing is coming up next. Now, one of the reasons that the judge stated that she was giving Hannah Gutierrez-Reed 18 months was because she didn't believe that the armorer showed any type of remorse. Now, if she didn't show any type of remorse, Alec Baldwin's in trouble because, in my opinion, not only has he not shown any type of remorse, but he's actually done the exact opposite. I know that there's a lot of debate about who is at fault. And a lot of people have said, you know, Alec Baldwin is simply an actor. His job is just to act. And because when he was handed this weapon, he was told that it was cold, that he bears no responsibility. Now, I can understand this point, but I just don't believe that to be true. I mean, if you lend someone your car and they go out and they run someone over and take their life, is it your responsibility because it's your car? Is it your fault because you told them that this car was safe to drive? Of course not. The minute that that individual who borrowed your car put the key in the ignition, your vehicle became their responsibility. They're responsible for driving your car safely. Cars are deadly, and it's no different with firearms. Now, if I hand someone a firearm and I tell them it's cold, that's a courtesy. That's not a declaration that they're no longer responsible for this firearm. Once someone takes possession of a firearm, it becomes 100% their responsibility. Whatever happens after you hand this person this weapon is their responsibility. They're responsible for whatever happens next. Now, it's been rumored that Alec Baldwin refused weapons training on how to do a cross draw, which is what he was doing when he shot Helena Hutchins. Now, is a cross draw difficult? No. You're basically just reaching across your body and grabbing your weapon from the opposite side. The only thing is that something very basic that gets forgotten sometimes when somebody's doing a cross draw is that they accidentally put their finger on the trigger. Trigger control is extremely important anytime that anyone is holding a firearm. Now, I mentioned in my previous Rust video that I do a lot of training with these types of weapons. And when I'm on an open range around other people who are also holding these types of weapons, one thing that I'm always scanning for is trigger control, making sure that people don't have their fingers on the triggers of their firearms. Now, there's a saying that you'll hear a lot on the range, and it's kind of crude, but it gets the point across. And you'll hear it a lot on a range. And people will say, keep your booger hook off of the bang switch. Now, like I said, it does sound kind of crude, But one of the things is that when you see someone who has their finger on the trigger of their weapon when they're not supposed to, you want to alert that person and get their attention immediately, because trigger control is that important. In an environment where firearms are being used, there's very, very basic safety precautions. It's not that technical, and there's a reason for that. You know, we keep safety precautions very basic because you want the people who are holding these firearms to remember these safety precautions. So they're kept very basic, very simple. Follow these rules and you will prevent accidents. Now, I know that Alec Baldwin is just an actor, but when he takes possession of a firearm, it's still a real firearm. Just because an actor is holding this revolver does not mean that it becomes some type of prop. It's still a very real revolver. Regardless of where a firearm is at, there's still safety measures that have to be followed. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They need to be followed. Even if this firearm is on a movie set, it's still a real firearm. You know, Alec Baldwin is not exempt from following these firearm safety measures just because he's a famous actor. The firearm doesn't care who Alec Baldwin is. And Alec Baldwin, he understands firearm safety, as he's confirmed in many statements. Let me ask you a question. If Alec Baldwin was pointing this weapon at himself and pulling the trigger, do you think that he would have followed those safety precautions? I have a funny feeling that he would. Now, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, she was the armorer on the set of the movie Rust. And it sounds as though she was running kind of a loose operation. Dummy rounds were not being safety checked consistently. And there were a lot of safety issues reportedly on the set of this movie Rust. So many safety issues that there were people who were actually quitting the movie because of them. And that's a problem. My question is, why weren't these safety issues addressed by not only Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, but by the people above her? The people above Hannah Gutierrez-Reed may not know anything about firearms, but that really doesn't matter. You know, if people are quitting the set because of safety issues, that's something that they should understand. So that's a problem. Now, I'm not going to go too much into Hannah Gutierrez-Reed because I've actually made an entire video about the armorer. So if you get a chance, go back and watch that video. It's a complete video about Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and her responsibility. Now let's talk about Assistant Director Dave Halls. This is a pretty stand-up guy, in my opinion. You know, he got up on the stand and basically took responsibility for everything that happened. He basically accepted the blame on himself. And, you know, there's someone else who did the exact opposite, and we're going to talk about that guy here in a minute. But Dave Halls is actually the person who handed Alec Baldwin the revolver and basically told Alec Baldwin that it was a cold firearm. Now, keep in mind that Dave Halls is the individual who handed Alec Baldwin the firearm. Now, keep this in mind because there's going to be some confusion about that here in just a minute. So, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed stated that she went into the church where they were filming the scene and she handed Dave Halls the revolver. But before she handed Dave Halls the revolver, She spun the cylinder on the firearm to show Dave Halls that the weapon was loaded. Now, after she hands Dave Halls this weapon, she leaves the church. Now, at this very second, when Dave Halls takes possession of this revolver, he now becomes 100% responsible for this firearm. At this point is where Dave Halls needs to safety check this firearm. You know, even though Hannah Gutierrez Reed spun the cylinder and showed him that it was loaded, when she handed him that weapon, it became 100% his responsibility. So it's his responsibility to check this firearm for himself. Now, he doesn't do that. Instead, he waits until the time is right, and he hands the firearm to Alec Baldwin and allegedly tells Alec Baldwin that this is a cold firearm. Now, at this very second, it becomes 100% Alec Baldwin's responsibility. Now, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, reportedly checked this firearm and handed it to Dave Halls. Now, it's Dave Halls' responsibility to check the firearm, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he hands it directly to Alec Baldwin, who also does not safety check the firearm. It is Alec Baldwin's responsibility to check this firearm and confirm that it in fact is unloaded. But he doesn't do that. So again, do you think that if he was pointing this firearm at himself and pulling the trigger, do you think that he would have double checked that firearm to make sure that it was unloaded? I think he would. He is fully responsible for this firearm that is in his hand. Just because Alec Baldwin is a famous actor does not mean that he doesn't have to follow the rules of safety when handling a firearm. If he's not willing to accept the responsibility of holding this firearm, then he really shouldn't be holding a firearm, period. He should not be using this firearm if he's not willing to accept the responsibility of what may happen while it is in his hand. Just because Alec Baldwin is a famous actor does not mean that he does not have to follow the same safety precautions when it comes to a firearm. And it shouldn't be considered okay for him to be oblivious to firearm safety just because he's an actor. He's using a firearm. He should know how to safely operate this firearm. It's as simple as that. If Alec Baldwin is going to use a firearm in his movie and he doesn't know how to safely operate it, then he has no business having that firearm in his hand. I know that there's a lot of people who believe that this revolver just magically went off in Alec Baldwin's hand and that he did not pull the trigger. But as somebody who knows about these types of weapons, in my opinion, Alec Baldwin definitely pulled that trigger. He basically takes a revolver that is 100% his responsibility, that he has not safety checked, and he points it directly at Helena Hutchins and pulls the trigger. Basically everything that you're not supposed to do. He was negligent. So basically, after he takes Helena Hutchinson's life, accidentally, he states to law enforcement that Hannah Gutierrez Reed is the person who handed him the firearm. But she's not. It was Dave Halls who actually handed him the firearm. So that tells you how well that Alec Baldwin was paying attention that day. He says that Hannah Gutierrez Reed handed him the revolver, but that Dave Halls is the one who told him that it was a cold firearm. Alec Baldwin begins making conflicting statements almost immediately. And then he does an interview where he's very adamant that he did not pull that trigger. Now, in my opinion, that's a lie. In my opinion, he did pull that trigger. In my opinion, he would have had to pull that trigger in order for that round to come out of that firearm. And to be adamant that you didn't pull the trigger, in my opinion, is a straight out lie. Now, Alec Baldwin may not have been aware that his finger was on the trigger. It's very, very possible that Alec Baldwin could have put his finger on that trigger, unknowingly, that he wasn't aware of it. But in my opinion, to state and be adamant that he didn't pull that trigger, in my opinion, that's a lie. Not only does Alec Baldwin say that he didn't pull the trigger, but he basically doubles down in this interview and says that he doesn't feel like he's responsible for anything because this was somebody else's fault. It's someone's fault, but it's not mine. That's basically what Alec Baldwin said. Now, Alec Baldwin shot Helena Hutchins after he failed to safety check a firearm and pointed this firearm directly at her and pulled the trigger. I'm sorry, but that bears some sort of responsibility, and Alec Baldwin does not seem to understand that. I'm sorry, I don't care how big of a movie star that somebody is. In my opinion, he accidentally shot Helena Hutchins and took her life because he failed to follow proper safety precautions. It's very simple. Firearms are very simple objects. It's the hands that these firearms get into that cause complicated situations. In my opinion, Alec Baldwin absolutely shares in the responsibility of Helena Hutchins' death. Now, Alec Baldwin can go around and blame everyone else, but himself. He doesn't want to take responsibility himself. He wants to blame everyone around him because he's just an actor. But to me, if you're using a firearm, then it's your responsibility to learn how to use that firearm before you just point it directly at someone and pull the trigger. These rules apply to everyone and anyone. It does not matter how big of a movie star that you are. If you're handling a firearm, it's your responsibility to know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, then you have no business even having this firearm in your hand. So it's going to be real interesting when Alec Baldwin comes up for his hearing here coming up, especially after the sentencing of Hannah Gutierrez Reed. This New Mexico court is basically letting people know we take these charges seriously. So if I was Alec Baldwin, I would definitely be concerned right now. Because if this New Mexico judge had a problem with Hannah Gutierrez Reed and her lack of remorse, then she's going to have a field day with Alec Baldwin. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe. I really do appreciate it. Stay tuned for my next video. We'll see you next time.